Imagine waking up in a world where the hammer and sickle wave high above Capitol Hill. Yet the Soviet anthem echoes in public squares. American television is state-controlled, and NATO, it never survived. In this alternate history, the Cold War didn't end with Western victory in 1991. Instead, the Soviet Union emerged as the global superpower. What would that mean for your life, for global politics, and for the very idea of freedom itself? The Cold War was never officially declared, but from 1947 until 1991, the United States and the Soviet Union fought a fierce battle for ideological dominance of capitalism versus communism, democracy versus totalitarianism. It started with a shattered post-World War II world. The USSR expanded into Eastern Europe, installing communist regimes. The US, through initiatives like the Marshall Plan, countered Soviet influence and built NATO to protect Western democracies. What followed was 4 decades of proxy wars, nuclear arms races, and space rivalries, with the ever-present fear of global annihilation hanging in the air. But what if history took another route? What if those razor-thin moments of tension had tipped in the USSR's favor? There were multiple moments where things could have shifted dramatically. Let's start with the Sino-Soviet alliance. In real life, by the 1960s, China and the USSR had a bitter ideological split. But imagine if that never happened. Imagine Stalin and Mao standing shoulder to shoulder, forming a super-communist bloc with billions of citizens, shared nuclear tech, and influence spanning Asia, Africa, and beyond. Then there's the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. This was the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. One miscalculation, one flinch from either side, and mushroom clouds could have risen above Washington and Moscow. Had Khrushchev refused to back down, America might have been forced into a humiliating peace, or total defeat. The space race is another critical piece. The Soviets launched the first satellite and put the first man in space. If they'd beaten the US to the moon, the symbolism would have been enormous. Countries across the globe may have turned to communism, seeing it as the path to technological superiority. And what about the Soviet economy? Gorbachev's reforms like glasnost and perestroika eventually opened the USSR to criticism and collapse. But if a more authoritarian leader had taken the reins, one who doubled down on control rather than loosening it, the Eastern Bloc might have stayed intact, keeping Eastern Europe under Moscow's grip indefinitely. Finally, the US itself had vulnerabilities. The Vietnam War was a failure. The 1970s brought recession, political scandal, and a weakening global presence. If American morale had collapsed, or if Iran's 1979 revolution turned communist instead of Islamic, the global balance could have shifted toward the Soviets. So what does that alternate world look like? First, NATO likely dissolves and the Warsaw Pact expands. Western Europe either becomes neutral or submits to Soviet influence. The Iron Curtain doesn't fall, it stretches farther. Institutions like the UN tilt toward Moscow's agenda. Global economies turn toward centralized planning. While the Soviet economy was never known for abundance, it was still the second largest on Earth by the 1980s. In this scenario, consumer goods become luxuries. Shortages, rationing, and poor quality products dominate marketplaces from Paris to Los Angeles. Technological development is slower, limited to military and surveillance. The internet, if it exists at all, is a highly controlled tool of the state. Media, entertainment, and education are used for ideological messaging. Hollywood collapses. In its place, propaganda-laden films glorifying workers and revolutionary struggle in global fashion is function over form. Gray, state-issued uniforms. Bi-militarily, United States bases are dismantled. The Soviet Navy dominates international waters. Eastern powers broker deals in the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa. Even sports, once a Cold War battleground, become Soviet-dominated showcases. In this version of history, the United States is not just defeated, it's transformed. American democracy is replaced by a puppet regime, loyal to Moscow. The dollar collapses, inflation soars, and U.S. infrastructure decays. Gas stations ration fuel. Grocery stores resemble Soviet-era breadlines. Consumer choice vanishes. Instead of malls, Americans visit state-run distribution centers. Ford and GM now produce Soviet-styled vehicles. Boxy, underpowered, and scarce. Freedom of speech and religion is gone. The FBI and CIA are absorbed into a nationalized security agency modeled on the KGB. Dissidents disappear, churches close or are closely monitored, and the social media doesn't exist. A heavily censored television system pushes pro-Soviet content around the clock. Children are taught revised histories. The Constitution is replaced with a new charter, emphasizing party loyalty and socialist ideals. Statues of Lenin and Marx decorate public squares once reserved for George Washington and Lincoln. Many people forget George Orwell coined the term Cold War as early as 1945, predicting a world dominated by two superstates locked in permanent tension. In 1946, Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech warned of Soviet expansion, one of the first public calls for a united Western resistance. Even more shocking, in 1945, Britain quietly developed Operation Unthinkable, a plan to invade the Soviet Union right after World War II. Military leaders advised against it, fearing massive bloodshed and a probable loss. And in 1983, NATO's military exercise Able Archer nearly caused nuclear war. The Soviets mistook it for a real first strike and went on high alert. Had either side misread the situation, the Cold War might have turned hot, with no going back. History doesn't move in straight lines. The Cold War was won, not just by power, but by perseverance, strategy, and often sheer luck. Had just a few events gone differently, the world we know could be unrecognizable. The thought of a Soviet-dominated globe isn't just a dystopian fantasy. It was once a very real possibility. This counterfactual journey reminds us how fragile freedom truly is, and how costly its loss could have been. As the Cold War may have ended, but the contest of ideologies never truly disappeared. If you found this story compelling, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.